We often think of laws and policies as these sort of fixed things. They get written, passed, and boom, they just work. Or, well, we hope they do.
Right. But if you look closer, it turns out they're a bit like complex machines, maybe even software. They can have hidden flaws, points where they might break down.
Or create completely unintended side effects, maybe miss the whole point. What if there was a way to, find those potential failures before they cause problems in the real world?
Well, that idea, that proactive analysis, that's exactly what we're diving into today. It's an approach that actually comes from engineering, believe it or not, but it's adapted for policy and law.
Okay.
It's called Policy and Legal Failure Modes and Effects Analysis, PL-FMEA for short.
PL-FMEA. Huh. Taking engineering rigor to the, let's face it, often messy world of legislation. I like it. That sounds really interesting.
It is. And our guide for this deep dive comes from some working papers by Aditya Kochar. They don't just describe PL-FMEA, they actually show it in action.
So our mission here is to unpack this PL-FMEA process step by step. We'll get into how it works.
And then use the examples from these papers. We'll look at India's patent rules and even a hypothetical tax policy to show you how this tool can systematically spot risks and, crucially, point towards solutions.
Right, because understanding this kind of analysis gives you, the listener, a really powerful lens. It helps you look at the rules that affect your life taxes, innovation, whatever it is, and see beyond just the good intentions.
You start to see the potential gaps, right? Where they might fall short or create new burdens or maybe even cause harm, especially to more vulnerable groups.
It's like seeing the cracks in the foundation before the whole house is built.
Exactly. Designing for resilience, for fairness, right from the start.
Okay, let's build this up. So the foundation is traditional FMEA, right? Failure modes and effects analysis. Common in engineering, manufacturing. What's the basic idea there?
Yeah. Traditional FMEA is all about foresight and design. Think about building a car engine. You try to identify every single way a part could fail. Maybe a gasket leaks, a bolt comes loose, something like that. Then you analyze the effects. What happens if that gasket leaks? Engine overheats, maybe the car stops, and you score these potential failures based on three things. Severity, how bad is the effect? Likelihood, how likely is it to happen? And this is key in engineering, detectability. How easy is it to catch the problem before the engine leaves the factory?
Detectability, finding it early.
Exactly. The goal is to find the riskiest failure modes and design them out, or put checks in place to catch them during manufacturing, prevent them from reaching the customer.
So it's a really systematic way to anticipate problems and hopefully stop them. And PL-FMEA takes that same preventative thinking.
And applies it to laws and policies,
Yep.
yes.
So the failures are different, obviously, not leaky gaskets.
No, not usually. Here, failures are things like legal ambiguities, loopholes, unintended social consequences, maybe administrative nightmares, or the policy just plain not reaching the people it's supposed to help.
It's about those misalignments within the system the policy creates or operates in social, economic, legal.
That's it. And this is where the framework makes a really interesting shift from the engineering original.
You mentioned severity, likelihood, and detectability for traditional FMEA. What does PL-FMEA swap in for detectability, and why is that such a big deal for policy?
Right. This is the core adaptation. PL-FMEA replaces detectability with affectability.
Affectability.
Yeah. Think about it. Detectability makes sense for a machine. You can run tests, inspect parts, add sensors, but how do you reliably detect the full impact of a policy failure before it's out there in the world? It's just incredibly complex.
Policies don't just interact with predictable parts, they interact with people, diverse groups of people.
Precisely. So affectability measures the human element. It looks at the size and the vulnerability of the population that could be harmed if that specific policy failure happens.
Okay, so it's not just if a failure happens, but who it happens to and how badly it hits them.
Exactly. In policy, understanding who gets affected and how many people or how vulnerable those people are is arguably much more critical than just how easily you might have spotted the potential flaw on paper.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, a seemingly minor loophole could be devastating if it impacts a huge group or a group that's already struggling.
Right.
So let's nail down these three dimensions for PL-FMEA as the source explains them.
Okay. First, severity S. That's the intensity of the harm if the failure occurs. It's usually on a scale, say 1 to 10. 1 is like negligible, a tiny inconvenience. 10 is catastrophic. Think widespread injustice, systemic breakdown, major societal harm.
Got it. Severity.
Second, likelihood, L. Pretty straightforward, the probability that this particular failure will actually happen in the context of the policy.
Three.
Again, maybe 1 to 10, from very unlikely to almost certain.
Okay.
And third, affectability A. This is the crucial policy one. It scores the size and vulnerability of the population affected. So a 1 might be a tiny, very niche group. A 10 could be, say, the entire group the policy is aimed at, or a particularly large and vulnerable segment of society.
Severity, likelihood, affectability, SLA. And these three scores are multiplied together to get the risk priority number, the RPN.
That's the calculation. S times L times A equals RPN.
And a higher RPN means bigger problem.
Bigger potential problem, yeah. Higher RPN signals a more critical failure mode. It tells you this needs urgent attention. You should prioritize addressing this risk through changes or safeguards before the policy goes live. It helps focus your efforts.
So it's not just a brainstorm of what could go wrong, it's a systematic scoring to see which potential issues pose the biggest threat, especially considering the human impact through affectability.
Exactly.
And the source outlines clear steps for actually doing this analysis.
Yes, it's a structured process, basically. 1, you identify the failure modes, you dig into the proposed law, look for loopholes, unclear language, enforcement challenges, ways it might backfire.
Okay.
2, you assess the effects. How could these failures hurt stakeholders, undermine governance, impact society?
Right.
3, you prioritize the risks. This is where you assign those S, L, and A scores, calculate the RPN for each failure mode, and rank them.
Focus on the big ones.
4, and finally, you propose solutions. Based on those high RPN risks, you recommend specific changes, maybe amendments, new procedures, to prevent or at least reduce the impact of those critical failures.
The whole point being to design better, fairer, more robust policies by catching these potential problems early on. It really is like a pre-mortem for laws, predicting how they might fail before they're even fully implemented.
Or a proactive health check, maybe, trying to ensure fitness for purpose.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Let's see PL-FMEA in action with that real-world example from the source. India's patent rules, specifically Section 10(3) and Rule 16, about submitting illustrative materials. What's the issue there?
So these rules basically say the patent controller can ask applicants for physical models or samples of their invention if it helps understand it. Rule 16 adds the caveat, only when necessary.
Sounds reasonable enough on the surface.
Maybe. But the key context, as the source highlights, is when these rules were written, the 1970s.
When 1970s. Okay, that changes things. That's pre-CAD, pre-digital everything, basically. Physical models and hand-drawn diagrams were probably essential then.
Absolutely. Understanding complex mechanics often required holding something physical. But today, we have incredibly sophisticated CAD, 3D PDFs, digital simulations, videos, secure online platforms for sharing complex data.
And other major patent offices, like in Europe or the US, they've adapted. They accept digital stuff.
Routinely. Often they prefer it. It's faster, cheaper, easier to handle and store.
So the potential failure point in the Indian system comes because the rules haven't quite caught up with the technology. That when necessary clause is maybe a bit too vague now.
That's precisely the argument the source makes. Without clear, objective standards for when a physical model is truly necessary in today's digital world, it opens the door to inconsistency, potential burdens, and other problems. And this is where PL-FMEA helps map them out systematically.
Okay, let's walk through the failure modes the source identified using this PL-FMEA lens for Section 10(3) and Rule 16. What's the first one?
Failure mode 1, unfettered examiner discretion.
Right, and this got scored S7, L08, AQ6. That gives an RPN of 336, which seems pretty high. What's the thinking there?
Well, the issue is the lack of clear guidelines. It means examiners could ask for physical models inconsistently, maybe arbitrarily, without needing a strong justification. That creates opacity, right?
Yeah, uncertainty for the applicant.
And potentially unnecessary costs if a digital version would have worked just fine. The likelihood is high because the rules themselves are vague, allowing for this discretion. Severity, S7, is significant because inconsistency erodes trust and fairness.
And affectability, A6.
That reflects that it mainly impacts applicants in certain fields, mechanical engineering, consumer goods, maybe biomedical, where physical models are more likely to be considered. So a defined but significant group.
Okay, so high RPN driven by high likelihood and significant severity for a specific group. What's failure mode 2?
Failure mode 2, logistical and cost burden of physical models.
This one's S6, L7, AGL5. RPM 210. Still substantial, but lower.
This focuses on the practical side. Making physical models costs money and takes time. You need tools, materials, maybe skilled technicians.
A barrier to entry.
It can be, yeah. Especially for individual inventors, academics, or small startups who might not have fancy prototyping labs in-house. The likelihood L7 is high because models are still requested. Severity S6 is moderate. It's a real burden. Affectability A5 is a bit lower because it hits those without resources hardest, not necessarily all applicants equally.
So the rule inadvertently disadvantages smaller players. Makes sense. What about failure mode 3?
Failure mode 3, confidentiality and IP leakage risk.
Ooh, this jumps back up. S8, L5, 87, RPN 280. That severity score of 8 is high. What's the risk?
This is really interesting. A physical model, unlike just drawings, can reveal a lot intricate design details, material choices, how it's assembled.
Trade secrets, essentially.
Exactly. Now, if that model gets mishandled, lost, stored insecurely at the patent office, competitors could potentially get their hands on it and reverse engineer the core invention before the patent's even granted.
Wow, that undermines the whole point of seeking a patent.
Absolutely. The severity, S8, of losing your competitive edge before you get protection is huge. The likelihood, L5, reflects that mishandling isn't guaranteed, but it's a real risk in any system handling physical objects. Affectability, A7, is high because this risk is particularly acute in cutting-edge sectors like robotics, medical devices, aerospace, where the physical embodiment is the key IP.
That's a serious potential flaw, undermining trust in the system itself. Okay, failure mode 4.
Failure mode 4, undefined timelines and consequences.
S5, L6, A6, RPN 180. More of a procedural issue.
Yeah, a procedural gap. The rules don't actually say how long an applicant has to submit a requested physical model.
Yeah.
This ambiguity creates uncertainty.
You don't know the deadline.
Right. So you risk accidentally missing some implied deadline. Maybe your application gets delayed or even abandoned. Likelihood, L6, because the ambiguity exists. Affectability, A6, because this uncertainty impacts potentially everyone, but maybe hits first-time filers or foreign applicants harder if they're less familiar with unwritten norms.
Uncertainty is definitely a burden. And the last one, failure mode 5.
Failure mode 5. No return or destruction guidance.
S4, LS7, Eagle 5, RPN 140. Lowest RPN, but still there.
Another practical point. What happens to these expensive, potentially sensitive models after the examination is done? The rules don't say.
Do you get it back? Is it securely destroyed?
Exactly. No protocol. This raises cost issues. Can the inventor reuse it? And ongoing security concerns. Is my IP still safe? Likelihood, L7 is high because there's genuinely no process defined. Affectability, A5, mainly concerns those who submitted complex physical items.
Okay, so summing up, the PL-FMEA analysis gives an average RPN around 229. That flags these rules as having moderate to high risk overall.
Right. And it clearly highlights the most critical risks, that unfettered examiner discretion, RPN 336, and the IP confidentiality concerns, RPN 280.
Because they threaten fairness and trust or carry the risk of catastrophic IP loss.
Precisely. The framework points directly at the biggest potential harms.
Okay, so PL-FMEA gives this incredibly detailed map of potential problems, prioritized by risk and, importantly, by who gets affected. But the process doesn't stop there, right? It's meant to lead to solutions. How does the source use this analysis to suggest concrete fixes for Section 10.3 and Rule 16?
Yeah, that's the crucial next step. The analysis isn't just academic. It directly informs specific, targeted recommendations for policy change. The identified failure modes and their RPNs tell you what needs fixing.
So what kind of changes did the paper propose based on this PL-FMEA?
It lays out several key amendments aimed squarely at those high RPN risks. Things like, first, establishing a digital-first compliance standard. Make digital submissions, CAD files, 3D PDFs, videos the normal, preferred default way.
Modernize the default.
Second, adding a physical-only if exception. Basically, restrict requests for physical models to only those rare cases where digital really isn't enough. And critically, require the controller to provide a written justification for asking for one.
Adds accountability. Makes sense.
Third, introducing standardized timelines. Put clear deadlines in the law, maybe 90 days to submit requested material, with an option for a 30-day extension.
Removes that uncertainty.
Fourth, establishing formal confidentiality and return protocols. Mandate strict procedures for handling and securely storing any physical models received. And give applicants the clear right to ask for their model back or have it securely destroyed after examination.
Addresses the IP risk directly.
And fifth, requiring the Patent Office to publish guidelines for digital formats. clear technical standards on acceptable file types, resolution, how to submit them, etc.
So everyone knows the rules of the game for digital submissions, and you can see how each of these proposed changes links directly back to a specific failure mode identified earlier.
Exactly. It's a very direct mapping, requiring justification and setting digital standards. That tackles the unfettered examiner discretion.
Right.
Make digital the default and providing format guidelines. That reduces the cost and logistical burden. Mandating secure handling and return destruction options.
Yeah.
That directly addresses the confidentiality and IP risk.
Yep.
Introducing clear deadlines. That eliminates the undefined timelines problem.
Justified it.
And publishing guidelines and formalizing protocols deals with the lack of format and return guidance.
It's really systematic. The analysis points to the weakness, and the proposed solution is designed specifically to strengthen that exact point. You end up with a potentially much more modern, efficient, and trustworthy system for inventors.
Using technology effectively while also shoring up core principles like fairness and protecting IP.
Now, to really drive home how flexible this PL-FMEA tool is, the second source applies it somewhere totally different tax policy. It uses a hypothetical, but it feels very relevant.
Right. This example imagines a new law, let's call it the Freelance Worker Tax Incentive Act 2025. And it focuses on Section 3, which lays out who will be eligible for some kind of income tax break.
Okay, a tax break for freelancers. What were the draft eligibility rules in this hypothetical scenario?
The initial draft said you had to meet several conditions. 1. Get over 75% of your income from freelance or digital services performed in India.
Okay.
2. Receive all that income through digital transactions with digital invoices as proof.
Digital only. Got it.
3. Have no formal employment contract alongside your freelancing.
No side digs with a salary.
And 4. Earn a gross annual income of $10,000 or less, so about 10 lakh rupees.
Okay. Seems clear enough on the surface. But apply PL-FMEA, especially that affectability lens, I bet problems emerge. What failure modes did the analysis pick up here?
Several big ones. And the one with the highest RPN by far was the exclusion of cash-paid freelancers.
Let me guess. High affectability. What were the scores?
You got it.
Yeah.
Severity 7, likelihood 8, and affectability a 9. That gives an RPN of 504. That 8.9 is huge.
Wow. So what's the issue?
The framework is screaming inequity here. By insisting only on digital transactions and invoices, the policy completely shuts out freelancers who get paid in cash. Think about workers in rural areas, semi-urban places, maybe sectors where cash is still common, or people with limited access to banking or digital tools.
A massive group.
A massive and potentially vulnerable group. The high affectability score reflects that. The policy, as initially drafted, wouldn't just miss them. It would actively exclude them, probably making existing digital divides even worse.
See, that's where affectability is just so powerful for policy analysis. It forces you to think about the real people impacted, especially those who might be left behind by a rule that looks neat on paper. What else came up?
Next was lack of clarity in freelancer definition. S6, LDIS 7, A8, RPN 336.
Still a high affectability score there, too.
Yeah. The hypothetical act didn't actually define freelancer. Sounds minor, but that ambiguity could lead to huge confusion. Tax authorities might interpret it differently, leading to disputes, inconsistent application.
Uncertainty again.
And potentially excluding lots of people who think they're freelancers, writers, designers, consultants, artisans, but don't fit some unstated official idea. The affectability, A8, is high because freelancer covers such a broad and diverse group.
So a definitional gap creates potential chaos for a large number of people. What other failures?
Penalizing hybrid income freelancers.
Yeah.
S5, LS6, A equals 7, RPN 210. This targeted the rule about having no formal employment.
Right, the no side job rule.
Exactly. Lots of people freelance part-time, maybe while transitioning from a salary job or just to supplement income. This strict rule disqualifies them completely. Affectability, A7, is high because this kind of hybrid work is really common.
So a policy meant to help freelancers ends up excluding a big chunk of them. That seems counterproductive. Was there one more?
Yes. Urban-centric implementation via digital-only proof.
Yeah.
S7, L6, A8, RPN 336.
Again, high affectability driving that RPN up.
It connects back to the digital payments rule. In parts of the country with poor internet, unreliable electricity, or lower digital literacy, requiring purely digital proof makes the incentive practically inaccessible.
Creates a geographical bias.
A systemic one, yeah. The severity, S7, is high because it locks out entire regions. Affectability reflects the large number of freelancers potentially living and working in these less connected areas.
Looking at those RPNs, that 504 for excluding cash-paid workers,
Oh,
driven by that affectability score of 9, it really jumps out. The framework is essentially shouting, this is the biggest potential point of unfairness. It affects the most people and possibly the most vulnerable.
it really surfaces those potential exclusions, those blind spots that you might miss if you only focus on the policy's main goal rather than how it interacts with the diverse reality on the ground.
And, just like the patent example, the source doesn't just identify the problems in this hypothetical tax policy, it uses the PL-FMEA findings, especially those high RPNs, to propose specific fixes.
Right.
What did the revised Section 3 look like?
The suggested amendments were designed specifically to tackle those failure modes, to make the policy more inclusive, more flexible, fairer.
Like what?
Things like lowering the required freelance income percentage, maybe to 60% plus a rezone, and explicitly allowing hybrid income earners.
Opens it up.
Critically, allowing alternative proof for cash income, maybe verified receipts, bank slips showing cash deposits, maybe even affidavits alongside digital proof. Not instead of, but alongside.
Addresses the biggest RPN issue.
Including a clear, formal legal definition of freelancer right there in the Act itself.
Reduces ambiguity.
And maybe increasing the income ceiling to something more realistic, say Shield 12 lakh, and tying it to inflation so it doesn't become outdated quickly.
Okay, and the goal of these revisions?
According to the analysis, it's about promoting inclusivity, bringing in those cash-paid and hybrid workers, flexibility giving people more ways to prove their income, clarity thanks to the definition, and just overall fairness, making the policy better, reflect how freelancing actually works for many people.
So these two examples together, the real patent rules, the hypothetical tax policy, they really show PL-FMEA as this structured, methodical way to cut through the complexity, right?
Definitely. And it shows it's not just about finding problems randomly. It's a systematic evaluation using severity, likelihood, and crucially, that affectability score to understand who might be harmed and how significantly.
And that rigorous analysis doesn't just sit there. It leads directly to specific, targeted ideas for making the policy better before it causes widespread issues, fixing it in the design phase.
Exactly. It's a tool for building stronger, more resilient, and hopefully more equitable policies from the get-go.
And connecting this back to you, the listener, understanding a framework like PL-FMEA helps you think more critically about the rules impacting your life. It gives you a way to see how potential downsides, especially for different groups, could be spotted and maybe fixed before things go wrong.
It encourages that proactive mindset rather than just reacting after the fact.
So, to wrap up, PL-FMEA. It's this systematic tool, borrowed from engineering, adapted for the policy world. It helps find and fix potential flaws in laws by looking hard at their severity, their likelihood, and especially their affectability, the impact on real people.
Making sure that human dimension stays front and center when we design and evaluate the systems that shape our lives.
Okay, here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about some rule or process you deal with regularly. Could be at work, in your local community, maybe a government service you use. Could you apply a bit of this failure mode thinking? Where might it break down? Who might it affect unfairly? And just thinking about that, what solutions might start to bubble up?